Hey, what is up, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Sonic the Hedgehog here, and I'm Sylvester the Cat here. We are back for some more yet again for the likes of the Merxy Toys videos. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to more Let's Play of Mario Kart 8 / Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for the Nintendo Wii U / Nintendo Switch. So, yesterday we have managed to once again dominate for the entirety of that particular Grand Prix Cup while going through the forms of the Egg Cup. So today, we're about to be taking on the forms of the 10th Cup for this point today, for the sake of the forms of the actual Grand Prix run through, and that is of course the Triforce Cup will be up next. So even then, yeah, we're about to get this thing to it then, shall we? Yeah, I'm really hyped about this because even then, the actual character choice for today's video, you guys could clearly tell by this point, for the sake of the forms of that thumbnail, is that we're going to be obviously selecting Link from the Legend of Zelda series. Or to be more accurate, Skyward Sword variation, because, you know, if you couldn't tell with the actual overalls, or especially noticeable with his clothings, the actual sleeves that he's got, and the familiar gloves that he's been had, and also that particular you know, adventure pouches that he's got from his back, or in this case, the actual, strap on the actual body, which I do recognize that, because that's actually based off from The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, basically. There's also the Breath of the Wild version, but we'll save that until whenever we, do battle mode or something, or perhaps even then, something else entirely. So even then, from now on, we'll just have to mainly focusing on the normal costume for Link, though, as it goes by. And then later on, though, whenever we get to the 2 final cups next weekend, then we can able to actually show off some Animal Crossing stuff, as well as the forms of, well, some Splatoon characters and all that stuff during in action. So, I think this combination will be okay, and as far as gliding goes, we'll definitely go for the Hyrule Kite. So just in case it makes a little bit more of a Zelda themes going on here. And speaking of the Zelda themes, let's hit into the forms of the Triforce Cup. Now, unlike the Egg Cup though, as we mentioned about this yesterday, that the Egg Cup only has like 1 retro track and 3 new tracks. Whilst the forms of Triforce Cup, as well as the forms of the final 2 cups, they managed to go to like a 50-50 when it comes to like the retro tracks and the brand new tracks at the same time. So even then, yeah, let's go ahead and dive right in. I apologize for the actual tongue twisting in the end, folks. So anyways, here we go with, to start things off in the Triforce Cup, we have the returning track from Mario Kart Wii. It's been a while since we actually had the returning tracks from Mario Kart Wii, ever since in Grumble Volcano, and also, what else is on the returning track? I would classify for saying, oh jeez, I don't even remember, to be honest. Oh yeah, Moo Moo Meadows. So even then, here we go with the forms of Wario's Gold Mine, which that was originally from, of course, from Mario Kart Wii, in the forms of the Flower Cup in the final track in that particular cup retrospectively. So, it only makes it a little bit of a difference between the forms of the original Mario Kart Wii track layouts like this compared to right now, and that is of course the actual anti-gravity section, and that's as far as we can able to say about this. So even then, and also you know with these little you know with the very annoying, frustrating getting to the forms of that particular minecarts you need to avoid, now it's no longer going to be a problem though, because as you can see, every time you hit those minecarts, basically it'll give you a short boost of speed. So even then, because you know this is obviously on the anti-gravity section, so but apart from everything else though, there aren't any major differences in outside of that though, apart from there is no you know, the half pipe kind of tricks, unlike the forms of how it does in the original Mario Kart Wii track like this, probably because of how the fact that they just now gonna be sticking to the point with the forms of like just performing some of these standard tricks rather than just, you know, utilize the actual Tony Hawk's kind of skills or something. So, but you know, I don't mind that at all, because even then though, it just makes everything else a little bit easier and easier said than done. So, yeah, today's day is the forms of the 10th of November, in this case in 2019. So, nothing's going on around here though, apart from we can able to now discuss upon the forms of, specifically, both Terry Bogard from the likes of the Fatal Fury series is now onto the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. In addition with that, we're also going to be discussing about the forms of our progression of the forms of the Mario Kart Tour Paris Tour, because even then, let's talk about the forms of the Paris Tour in Mario Kart Tour first. First off, that we've already mentioned about this before already. Now is the fact that obviously this usually takes place in the Paris tour, so at least we got ourselves a Paris track, which after I play for about a couple of days or so, at least even Nintendo since about a few days ago, or in this case for this matter though, Sonic is almost like 4 days ago exactly right now. And for what I've played it, I think it's actually a little bit better than the forms of how it does it on New York tour for sure, and especially noticeable with, well, Tokyo Blur, which, don't get me wrong, I found it to be okay in Tokyo Blur, but in New York tour, or New York Minutes though, as far as I like to say for this point, I just found it very, very boring, and it's kind of like, I don't know, not so exciting after all. Oh yeah, we'll mention more on that later, because as you can see on screen right now, here we go on to the third Rainbow Road? Jeez, 3 Rainbow Roads in a row when it comes to a Mario Kart 8 itself. But this time around though is usually going to take place on, you know, the Super Nintendo version of that specific track. But the obviously major difference is that, well, generally speaking, that this is actually the third time able to coming back into the forms of Rainbow Road Super Nintendo counterparts because, well, obviously because they already did manage to make that track return. Well, they firstly introduced that on Super Mario Kart, of course, on the final track in the Special Cup, of course. And then later on, though, in Mario Kart Super Circuit, they actually introduced that on the forms of the same method as the forms of the original counterpart. And also, it actually makes its return for the second time in Mario Kart 7, but it usually takes place in the Lightning Cup on the final track. And now, in the forms of Mario Kart 8 / Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is now going to be located in the forms of the Triforce Cup, and usually it takes place on the second track, which is kind of odd if you're able to try to place the Rainbow Road track on the forms of the second track, because it normally does that for last tracks in the between, but still no luck with the forms of seeing the actual the remake of that specific GBA Rainbow Road just yet though, until when Mario Kart 9 came around. But then again, we'll have to wait and see what happens though until the forms of, let's just say, about next year or so. So yeah, aside from those side of things though, oh yeah, another thing we'd like to point things out is that the only major differences between this version of Rainbow Road compared to most other Rainbow Road SNES variations is, of course, as you can tell from the actual layout, although it might actually feel exactly the same as you remember, but also you still need to avoid the invincible rainbowy forms, because every time you run into them, well, basically they'll just give you a hit. But also, if you can see on the actual the background, it doesn't take you to the outer space this time around though, with stars and everything. Instead, it's more accurate though in the actual skies, right, like usually above from the village. So kind of weird, but even then though, and also that track will make its return in Mario Kart Tour. So that was about the 4th time that we're able to actually bring that back. So even then though, that makes it a little bit more of a space themed again. So anyways though, so now let's move on to the new track in this game that is usually introduced, is Ice Outpost, which is kind of like the sort of a similar track as in the Mount Wario, although except there was no sections, instead it was just basically just, you know, just laps in general. And also another thing is the fact that we were expecting to be able to race on the actual snow or ice again, but turns out it was actually getting onto the, well, let's just say either the yellow part of the road or the green part of the road. So yeah, honestly, out of all the actual tracks in the DLC department, it is definitely one of the most least involved to me though. Although don't get me wrong, it is a cool track, don't get me wrong. It's just that I'd never even actually get used to it as much. Probably because of the fact that we were expecting to able to actually see how we can able to drive around in the snow again, ever since in Mount Wario. But at least even then though, it does have its very cool entrance in Mount Wario track. I don't know, something about this track doesn't seem to quite fit in well for me, but that's for the sake of clarity, for the sake of feelings for that specific stuff. So, yeah, let's talk about more details about the forms of Mario Kart Tour. Aside from taking place on the actual Paris track, they also managed to bring back Mario Circuit 3 ever since in Mario Kart Wii, which I was quite surprised about that, because even then, we were expected to able to actually believe, about the fact that it depends on what events they're going to be going through. I think, fundamentally though, Sylvester though, I think Super Nintendo's, Mario Circuit 3 will be the only track returning at the moment right now, but until the future updates or future events, hopefully we'll add some more into it. So, including forms of, DK Pass from Mario Kart DS. Yeah, that's probably true. I think they're actually going to do that for the Christmas events, so God knows whatever that's going to happen. So, yeah, in addition with those side of things, we also managed to come across into in Mario Kart Tours. Now, we've already briefly mentioned about this before, about the Sheriff Shy Guy, or essentially is known as Pedestry Sheriff, as what it's known, and his special item was actually the Mushroom Canyon, very similar to Peachette. And there's also Peach Vacation outfit, based off from Super Mario Odyssey, which it's pretty cool though, but then again, because it's all depending on luck with the actual microtransactions, which even then, kind of problematic. But the actual special item that she got, however, though, and I believe it was actually a coin block, similar to the Japanese themed costume from Mario back on the Tokyo tour. And finally, the forms of the actual third character that's been added in that particular tour, and that's actually kind of a weird one, and that is the forms of Toad from Pit Crew. And the actual special ability for that is the Burrowing Flower, which is kind of odd though, but even then, that again, luckily though, he was actually in the super rarity, but unlike the higher end ones, it's actually pretty luck based, so. But anyways though, that's enough about that specific discussion about Mario Kart Tour at this point, because as you can tell, we're now racing on to the final track in the forms of the Triforce Cup, which makes perfect sense, because as you can see right now, we're actually going to be racing in Hyrule Castle, which even then, or Hyrule Circuit I should say. And it's actually a very, very cool stage, because it actually represents the actual, the Zelda track for one thing, and also because if you go inside the actual Hyrule Castle, then as you can see on that particular familiar jingle right there, we actually come across into the actual Master Sword right there. And what that thing can do, well, basically it gives you the opportunity you can able to actually just get a little bit of a shortcut syndrome. And basically, in order to actually do that, is that you need to actually activate all three of those blue shards all at one particular drift or turn, and in that way you would able to actually just cut off the faults of certain parts of the actual road. So, pretty cool though, and it's also very cool is that rather than collecting coins, instead we need to collect rupees, which actually makes it obvious because we actually on a different Nintendo course, which is very awesome. And also because of how the fact that, well, we actually come across into those familiar enemies from the likes of the previous Zelda games, basically. I think most of these enemies are heavily borrowed from the likes of, let's just say in Skyward Sword, for instance. But basically, we come across into ourselves the forms of that particular plant enemy, as you can see right there. That's actually one of those enemies that's based off from Skyward Sword, as well as those bats. And I think that's as far as we can think of. So even then, even though we were expecting to see Gorons will be on here, but unfortunately that's not the case though. So yeah, this is pretty awesome though, because it kind of reminds me of the similar thing for how it does it in the Wii U version specifically on Sonic Lost World, where basically in Sonic Lost World also has the Legend of Zelda themed level, but it's usually calls it the Legend of Zelda Zone. Whilst in the forms of that zone, basically it just contains like two different set pieces, one in the actual Hyrule Field, as well as the forms of the Goron Caverns and all that stuff, which is very awesome, and you can be able to claim all three pieces of the Triforce at the very end of the level, which is pretty cool. And however though, in this particular Hyrule Circuit, as you can see right there, we can just, simply just drive through the actual field, as well as the forms of driving inside the actual, likely in, well, let's just say the Hyrule Castle itself, which I will say though, I actually really enjoyed this track, basically, whenever I managed to first time playing this on the Wii U. Even though the actual turning part is a little bit difficult, even if you really want to go through the 200cc on that track though, and because of that though, in our 200cc progression on stars and stuff like that, well, at the moment right now, we've only just got 1 star just because of that, that curve part right there, so. Although, I would appreciate if I was going to tell you guys about the forms of more details about Terry Bellegarde from the likes of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate DLC, but yet again, we're too busy doing all these discussions about differences between tracks, and especially noticeable for likely nothing else. So I promise you guys I will mention more on those specific stuff whenever I get back into Wario World tomorrow, and I can definitely mention about the forms of my first impressions on Terry Bogard and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, so I'll promise you guys about that. So, yeah, once again, we managed to claim a first place domination with all these flawless victories right here, and the highlights usually takes place in Wario's Gold Mine, and once again, much like the Egg Cup, well, basically it just gets like a very simple trophy, so kinda wish I could just have like a Triforce shaped trophy. I mean, that would be epic. But anyways, though, we'll get the endings off here, so join us next weekend for more of Let's Play of Mario Kart 8 / Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and that was the fact that we're going to be taking on the final 2 cups in the game, which we're going to have to go through the Crossing Cup, and after that, it will be the Bell Cup. So see you guys in the next weekend. Later, fellas.